I talk for a second?
Excursion into
Coaching. So here we are talking about coaching. I'm here with Ankush Jain. And I'm excited about this conversation because I've heard a lot about you. Not in the traditional way that I hear about people, but mostly through your coaching. Because a colleague of mine who I value a lot, he's been coaching with you for a while, and he often talks about his experiences with his own coach. And it made me super curious about you and your style, what you think about it. I've heard your name around mostly through the Chandlerian school, as I call it. So I get a bit of a sense for where you're coming into coaching with. I've done a bit of research, obviously, and really curious about some of the things you write on your website and that you said in some other podcasts or bits of content. You write quite a lot, which I really like. So I can't wait to tap into you and what you think about coaching. And I think it can go places where I'm sure there's a lot of value there for many other coaches. So welcome so much, Ankush. What else? How else would you introduce yourself? For example, what would you say at a dinner party if somebody asks you what you do?
Well, thank you first of all for having me on your show. I appreciate the invite and looking forward to this conversation too. You kind of caught me off guard a little bit when you said, what would I say at a dinner party? Because what I would say at a dinner party is probably very different. And I don't really talk too much about coaching in kind of social situations. But I guess I could just introduce myself as a coach. I've been professionally coaching since 2012. I did that part-time for a while and then went full-time at the start of 2015. I'm based in the UK. I've moved around a bit. So if you hear older interviews, I'll be different place at the moment. I'm in the kind of east of England. We live in a little village. I have a cute little baby boy who is about 19 months old. So it's
lovely.
Yeah, fun time being with him.
How are you sleeping?
Yeah, okay, fine. He's actually, touch wood, a really good sleeper. And it's great. Challenging at times, but for sure. But great. And what else can I say about coaching? Yeah, I love coaching. I love the profession. I'm a big fan of the profession. I'm very passionate about it, as probably will come out on this podcast. I wrote a book that I published in 2019. I'm writing another book for coaches at the moment. I'm just looking forward to this conversation and sharing things that would be useful to other coaches.
Fantastic. Yeah. And if I got anything from what I've seen so far is that you also embody this philosophy of serving, really helping people out as a cornerstone for your business and for your coaching approach. I really value that in people. Does it hit in the core as far as I can see?
Yeah, and maybe I'll give you a bit of background. So when I got into coaching in 2012, I had been around the personal development world for a long time, over a decade, and I'd hired coaches, I'd done various trainings, I'd spent thousands of pounds or dollars or euros, whatever, flying around the world, attending trainings. I would listen to audios in my car while I was driving. I would be reading books, and I was a real kind of personal development junkie, and wasn't new to the personal development space. And, when I started coaching, I didn't really know anything about the business of coaching, but I thought, hey, it sounds like a cool thing. It was kind of a dream. Wow, I could get paid to help people. How cool is that? Because one of the facets, I guess, of me when I was in the personal development world, I never planned on becoming a coach. But whenever I learned something, I was always excited because I was excited about sharing it. So people in my world, I always wanted them to benefit from whatever I was learning. My friends, my colleagues, I would share personal development CDs with my colleagues at work, but with my boss's boss who loved it, and we'd talk about personal development stuff. So, I was always into sharing and just almost like a hobby, like, hey, I don't know if someone's into computer games, they're like, hey, have you checked out the new, I don't know, Call of Duty or something? I don't know. I'm not into computer games, right? But it was the same way for me, that if I learned something new that could help me be more effective in the world, I was always, really, I would enjoy sharing that with people. I would get a kick out of helping people. Mm-hmm. And so when I got into coaching, I didn't understand too much about the business of coaching. And at the beginning, it seemed like I had to do stuff which was not in line with that natural vibe that I had of helping, right? It was like, well, let me help you a little bit, but then you got to pay me. And I've got to hit people's pain points to get them to sign up with me, which really felt, it didn't feel right to me, And I remember going to this big personal development conference, I think about a year before I became a coach, something like that, 6 months or a year. And I was such a big fan of personal development. It helped me so much that I went there and I was like, wow, there are all these big names there. And I'm not going to mention who was there, but people would know, some of the names that were there. And there was so much heavy selling, so much manipulation, right? There was one guy who was like, and you could see it like, if you're sitting here in the audience and you've got a woman in your life and she tells you she's okay, she's lying, she resents you for not buying her the stuff that she needs. And I was just like listening to that. And I had so much respect for the coach that this person was representing. And I was like, I'm never buying anything off you again. Mm-hmm. And it was such a shame because I was like, I know how much personal development and coaching and training can really help. It changed my life. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was like, wow, taking something so pure to me, and it really sullied it, and I felt so grateful that a lot of teachers and mentors I'd come across weren't like that. And so anyway, so I get into coaching and I was very mindful of not wanting to be like that, but it felt like I had to do a bit of it and it never gelled with me. And so when I came across Steve Chandler's approach, which is all based on service, that just landed so well, so quickly, that it not only works, but it made sense for me and my own personal value system. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to a guy yesterday who was interested in working with me. He got a lot of value out of it. And then he's like, I'm not in a position to pay you or hire you right now. And he was really like cagey and like anxious. And I was like, why are you being anxious? And he's like, I don't want to feel like, I've taken advantage of it. And I was like, hey, mm-hmm. I'm good. I love that I get to talk to people all day, every day and help them.
Yeah.
Right? That's all I care about.
And it's such a helpful attitude to have to go into consultations with, is to enjoy what is happening right now. I feel such a privilege to be able to hear these stories in such depth and meet people in a way that a lot of people around them actually don't get to meet them. And if you come in with an attitude of like, yes, I really want to help you and I'm very, passionate and I'm hoping that we can go ahead. But if it's not the right time for you, or if it doesn't feel like a good fit right now or in general, then that's totally okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, I really think it's a huge privilege that we get to do this work for a living. Mm-hmm. And I really treat it that way, and I get, as you can tell, I get very passionate about it. And I think, it's funny. I really believe that coaching the profession of coaching has so much power to change the world, like really, right? Because when we coach people and we we're not doing something to them, but whatever happens in that process called coaching, and they wake up to more clearly see who they are. That's happened for me with my coach. It doesn't just impact the person. I say this to people all the time. It changes everyone in their world, right? So as I've changed, as I've been coached, it is unbelievable. If you met me, I'm 39. If you met me when I was 18, or not even when I just turned 19, it would be laughable. Like there'd be no way that I'd be doing what I'm doing now and who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Like before I became a coach, people would say, wow, you've changed so much, because I was into personal development, and that's the power of this work. But now it's like, I see coaching literally can change us beyond what anything that we see is possible, because I've lived that.
Mm-hmm.
And that has had such big impacts on my whole family, my friends, my wife. My son probably wouldn't have been born if I didn't get coached, because I would have messed up my marriage. Right. I probably would have messed up before I got married. I messed up the relationship. But let's even assume that I got to having a son, and let's say it was the same son with the same wife, right? His life is going to be so much better now because of me getting coached. And I know that's what happens for my clients and clients of coaches. Right. And so who knows the ripples? We don't even get to see them.
Yeah.
And so, I get really touched by that. I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about that. That's what we do. It's really profound work.
Yeah. The generative effect is enormous, and people become better people when they become coaches, but also when you become coached. When you get coached, you develop a different relationship with yourself, which immediately changes the relationship with people around you. And so I do believe in the generative effect. And that's part of why I love this profession so much. I think we have that very much in common.
Yeah.
I would love to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned that you were into personal development before you became a coach. You've traveled around the world. You've done a lot, spent so much money on all of these courses, really invested in yourself. What allowed you to do that? You're coming from a corporate background, right?
Yeah. So, I want to make it clear that the kind of real investment only happened like the last few years before I professionally turned into a coach. So I was fortunate, and I was also a bit crazy that I had no real hobbies apart from coaching. I mean, I like traveling. I like hanging out with my friends. I like going out and socializing. But really my passion, I was hooked to like personal development, right the way through from kind of like 19, 20 years old. And so I hired my first coach when I was 25, and I was fortunate. I had a corporate job. I earned well. And I had disposable income, right? And maybe when other people were spending disposable income on going out and getting drunk, I was spending my disposable income on personal development stuff, and there's so much stuff for free. So a lot of stuff that I did didn't cost me anything. But interestingly, when I got a coach, that was helpful. And I was the coach's first client. So he was very raw, and he made lots of mistakes that he probably wouldn't make now, but it was still a great experience. He was constantly late. I mean, he had me waiting once for him for like 2 or 3 hours in London. There was like some real bad. I won't say too much about it. I don't want to badmouth it, but like there were some things that weren't great, which was helpful too, because it helped me see what I wanted to be like as a coach. But there was some great stuff about it too. And then like a few years later, then I worked with someone else, and I did their group program, an online program. Then I met them in person, and then they introduced me to someone else, and I flew to Las Vegas and did a training over there. And I really saw investing in myself and paying for that really had me show up differently. Because maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I used to like pirate loads of stuff. There was all this stuff online. I would download ebooks and courses, and I'm like, yeah. And I would never watch them. I'd never watch them. I'd listen to some stuff, some audiobooks. But a lot of stuff I just had lying around on my computer that I never got around to. And I realized something in kind of my like late 20s, that when I pay for something, right, like I just treat it so differently. It benefits me to pay. And I remember when I was like 28, 29, and I did a few things that were quite, expensive. Well, not expensive is relative. They cost, thousands of dollars. Let me put it that way. And after I did that, I was like, man, I wish I did this years ago. Like, it was so good paying the money, seeing a coach in real life, like doing some kind of training. And that wasn't even one-on-one. And I really saw, the benefit of that. But what enabled me to do it, just, I guess it was my passion, bloody mindedness. And I really didn't spend money on too much else. I used to go traveling a little bit here and there, but it was, when you're earning, a half decent salary, a few £1,000s a year, if you're not getting drunk, there's your money. So
yeah,
there you go.
Right. Would you say that's crucial for coaches to have gone through their own journeys, to have, invested in themselves to that extent?
I wouldn't say it's crucial that they've gone through the journey investing. So I think it's crucial that they keep doing that. Right. One of the things that I've learned from my coach, you mentioned Steve Chandler. I've been working with him nonstop. We've not had a break for 7 years. And we're still working together. And what I was amazed when I hired him, he was known even back then as the godfather of coaching. He'd written all these books. He didn't need to do anything. Like, if I looked at it from the outside, there wasn't any need for him to do any more personal development. And I've been in awe over the last 7 years of watching him closely. I have a very close relationship with him, and seeing what he does and everything he invests in, from kind of strategic stuff right the way through to, real spiritual growth. And he's a very different coach now than he was 7 years ago. And he would say a lot, and I would agree, a lot more effective. And that's really been great for me to kind of be near that and see that, there's no end point. I kind of realized that many years ago, that if I was in this profession, it's just part of being in this profession is I would always be on some kind of learning journey. Yeah. Maybe I'll get to a stage where I'll have a break in coaching for a little bit. I can see that happening, but I don't think I'll ever get to a stage where I'm not learning. That, and I love that about this profession. And I actually say, someone says to me, should I get into coaching? I'll always say, well, there are a few things. And one of them is, well, do you like learning? Right? Do you have that learning mindset? If you do, if that's a passion for you, then this is a great profession to be in. Like, to me, like, personal development was my hobby in my 20s. Now I have an excuse to spend all this money on developing myself because it's my job, which I love.
Part of the job, yeah.
Part of the job. It's great, So and if you don't have that, if I don't think there's that many people. There are some people who come into this profession thinking, right, I've done this, I just want to get paid, and I'm not going to learn anything else. Well, I don't think those coaches tend to last very long in this profession.
Yeah, and I think what's important, what I want to underline is that the learning journey is the important one, the continuing to develop. You don't need to spend however much you spend on coaching with Steve Chandler or, flying to whatever, see Tony Robbins on the other side of the world. People can invest in themselves and they can continue to learn. Somebody's 50 pounds is another person's 500 or $5,000. So I think as long there's so much knowledge out there, and some you have to invest quite a bit, and some people need to stretch themselves more than others. But I think what's important is that we continuously grow, because everything I learn tends to influence my coaching in some way or another. I can notice in supervision, on reflection, how certain bits that I'm currently reading or learning about or coursing in, how they come up while I'm sitting with clients. And it's helpful not to just learn, but then to create the spaces where we can integrate what we learn into the way that we work with people.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that, there is a difference. And I'm not saying anyone needs to do anything or hire anyone. But what I did see for myself is because I was really into personal development, like I said, for a long time, but it was only the last few years that I really hired people. And maybe it's just my learning style, and I would love books. I would get a lot of knowledge, but there was something very different about working with someone, either as a coach, one-to-one, or in a small group. To me, there was a different level of then understanding what that person was sharing or teaching or trying to address. because everyone that I hired actually, or worked with in a significant way, I'd actually consumed a lot of their content for a long time before I worked with them in a paid fashion. And yet, despite having consumed so much of their content and thinking I had a good grasp of what they were about, it was so different when you're in that conversation in real life, and you can bring your own particular challenges or whatever to the situation. And I think there is something, about there was a change in me when there was a willingness to invest, a certain amount of money. And maybe that's a bit controversial. Maybe it only applies to me. I'm not suggesting anyone has to do that. But there was 2 years ago, just under, I invested in an apprenticeship with Steve Chandler, which was tens of thousands of dollars. And I'd never, even though I'd worked with Steve, it was kind of more than double what I'd previously paid him. And we had the double whammy that the exchange rate was really bad at the time, right? For kind of UK to US. And so it was the most amount of money. My wife was pregnant. We were expecting our first child. It was completely the wrong time to do it. And I did it. And it felt right to do it. But there was something shifted in me, right? There's something shifted in me. And I've heard other coaches talk about it, and they all would say, until you do it, you can't say. And I experienced that. I was like, when I handed over such a large sum of money, it was just a ridiculously large sum of money for me, something changed. Even though I'd been working with Steve for so many years, I really changed in how I showed up with the same person. He wasn't holding back for 5 years. It was a bigger agreement. I changed. And it was the same thing years ago when I went 2012, when I went to Las Vegas. It was about $3,500 plus flights and a few other things. And in those days, for me, I was 29 years old. That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. And putting in whatever was significant for me, I think there is something about that, right? There really is.
I still draw from that experience the first time, where I put a serious amount of money on the table. I still talk about it sometimes because when I pitch a package that is quite expensive, some of them are. And I can see the same reaction that I probably had in my face, and I can resonate with that. And I think, as you say, once you have the experience of having invested in yourself to that degree, I think we speak with a different kind of confidence about believing in the potential that kind of action has.
Absolutely.
I'd love to dig into to Steve Chandler and coaching approaches a bit. And partly, I'm just interested what it's like to get coached by Steve Chandler and kind of what's his style is. But also, I'm particularly interested in how much mentoring is in there, because I've seen him do a few sessions with people, but there's a strong mentoring element. And he has access to so much knowledge as well. And I know a few other people who got coached by Steve, and I think he's bringing that part in. You also mentioned on your website that there's an interplay between life coaching, business consulting, and mentoring. So I wonder, first of all, what's it like to work with Steve, but also what's it like for you, in terms of bringing these elements together? Because there's such a range to what coaching can be. And some coaches are just straight up mentors or consultants, and others are very facilitative and they wouldn't bring themselves into that relationship much. So, that's on the table now. Maybe you can speak into that space.
Yeah, I mean, I can only really speak about my journey with Steve, which would be different to other people. And sometimes Steve's told me stories of how he's worked with a client, anonymously. I worked with a client like this, and I was like, wow, he's never spoken to me in that way or coached me in that way. And I would sometimes talk to other coaches who were getting coached by Steve, compare, what did you learn from Steve? And, we'd see if we could glean some more information. And what was so interesting to me was that the coaching sessions were so different, and like Steve and I have a really similar sense of humor. We joke around a lot. And so I just assumed he was like that with everyone. And then I would talk to, another coach who was similar age to me, was also male. And I'm like, oh, Steve's this or that. And he was like, oh, Steve never does that with me. Mm-hmm. And so it's different with every person. And I can relate to that, because if I reflect on my coaching with my clients, it's very different too. Mm. And so with someone, there might be a ton of silence, and I don't get involved, and I let the client come to their own conclusions, because I just get a sense that works for them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's bad coaching in a way, because I'm talking a lot. I recently, like 6-8 months ago, had a in-person day with a client. Maybe it was a bit longer. It was in between lockdowns and pandemics and where we could meet. And so I had a client come and spend the day with me, and I wasn't listening to him at all. Well, that's not true. I was listening, but I was really challenging. Right. And I was really kind of like holding his feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. And there was a little voice in my head was going, this is bad coaching. You're not letting the client find their wisdom. And I kind of ignored it and I just went for it. Mm-hmm. And the client leaves, and I was like, maybe I should be different next time. I was maybe second guessing myself. And the client then tells me a day or two later that he went home. He lived with his parents at the time. And his parents said, what did he do to you? You're not the same, in a good way, like you're not the same person as when you left here. Right. And he found it so impactful. And I think I've probably got that from Steve Chandler, who I feel got it from Steve Hodison. It's like at a certain point you throw all the rules out of the window, and it's just about the person in front of you. And so, it's a bit of an art, there's science to it. So Steve Chandler, I know he can coach me in Byron Katie, using the work he has. He has a grasp and understanding of the 3 principles. He's brought that into our coaching sessions. He brings really world-class business consultancy, which he's done a lot of. He brings mentoring, and he brings, it sounds weird, he brings friendship. Like it's just, he seems to bring whatever helps me in that moment and what I need.
Yeah. And I think that is really the art, to frame our space in this helping by talking spectrum, if we wanted to call it that. I like Eric Dehaan's playing field, which goes from between challenging and supporting, and exploring and suggesting. There's different segments. Like we might just put some stuff on the table for somebody to consider, but then 20 minutes later, it's deep exploration, and we would never bring anything from ourselves in. Sometimes it's important that we just reinforce what somebody wants to do and believe, and almost in a cheerleading kind of way. And sometimes we really need to challenge them quite hard, and to figure out which approach is helpful, and also to acquire the skills and the knowledge to be able to hold whichever area of that playing field is going to be most appropriate, and somehow be able to let the client make those decisions, get a sense for what they need right now. I think that's the art of coaching. And I think the more mature a coach gets, I think the more, the bigger their playing field.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? One of the things that I gave myself permission a long time ago was I gave myself permission to mess up, because I realized if I was going to try and do it right, like I mess up now all the time, but it's, if I got so much in my head, like, oh, I need to do it right. And maybe I should be more supportive rather than challenging. Maybe I should be this or that. Mm-hmm. In the moment, I wouldn't be helpful. Yeah. Right. And so, and I see the same thing with, right. I see the same thing with Steve, with Steve and me. Sometimes over the years, he's challenged me and I wasn't ready to hear it, and I've pushed back. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he's coached me and I've done the opposite. And one thing that I love about Steve is he's cool with that. It's not like it's going to be his agenda. he will do whatever makes sense to him, but he's totally okay with me going and doing the opposite. And maybe that's the right way. Maybe I come back and go, oh, you know what, Steve, that wasn't right. But that's, this is life. It's not a computer game and with, everything's in a certain kind of boundary or whatever. Yeah. And so I think that's the other part of it. And to me, it's kind of exciting, and it's also a style thing, right? Yeah. Like every coach has a different style, and different. And I'm realizing this for myself as I'm maturing as a coach, that in certain situations or with certain coaches, I have a preference. And I like working with, this was a big insight for me years ago, and it sounds so obvious when I say it, but I had a realization that I want to work with people who want to work with me. Right. And it might sound like, well, of course, but it wasn't an of course until I had that insight. It was like, no, I've got to convince people that I'm a good coach and they've got to work with me. And that shifted when I was like, no, part of the requirement for me to take someone on as a client is that they value what I say and value the approach I'm bringing. And that works for both of us, because if they don't, they're better off spending their money somewhere else. It would be a better investment for them. Right. And also it's more fun for me to work with people because I'm in this profession to help people. So if someone's not finding me helpful, and not everyone will, right? There's no coach who everyone finds helpful. We all have preferences. So if that's true, then it just makes sense to have that fit be a good fit.
Yeah. And that kind of implies that people already kind of know you, or they know what they're getting, or they want to tune in with you. But I guess that brings us into a different kind of direction of this conversation. I want to save that for a little bit later, perhaps. You mentioned the 3 principles. You mentioned Byron Katie's work. I saw the 3 principles on part of your website. They seem to be at the core of your coaching approach. So could you tell us a bit more about what the 3 principles are and how they shape the way that you work with people?
Yeah, I came across them really by accident. So when I started looking into coaching, I was like, well, let me go and get trained. And I looked around at, from online courses to, various programs in London. And I came across, or I knew of Jamie Smart, who's a UK based coach. And I spoke to him, and he didn't on paper, because he wasn't cheap. The course was like the same price or very similar price to doing a master's at a very prestigious university in executive coaching. And I kind of narrowed it down to these 2 things. I'm like, well, I get a master's and they're going to cover all these things, and, I'll get a certificate and all of that. And then I spoke to Jamie, and I was drawn to that. And he coached me a little bit for free. We just had half an hour session for several months before that. That was really helpful. Right. So I knew he was good at what he did. And so I kind of went with him and I signed up, but I had no idea what the 3 principles was. But his whole training was basically a 3 principles training, which is a psychological / spiritual understanding of how we create our reality. And the 3 principles are the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. Which we don't need to go too much into, otherwise we'll take an hour just talking about that. But if I boil it down to simplistic, right, language or best as I can, what the 3 principles point to is our experience of reality. The lowest common denominator are these 3 principles, right? Mind is the energy of all things. Consciousness you could call our awareness, and thought is all mental activity, kind of our thinking. Conscious thinking, unconscious thinking, the whole lot.
What did you say? Mind was the matter of all things?
Mind is the energy of all things.
How so?
Right? It's the definition of that, of mind, right? So if you just imagine, what do 3 principles people mean by mind? They're not talking about brain. They're talking about God. They're talking about energy. They're talking about, everything, right? And so it's kind of like, well, if that's powering our experience of life, right? How else do we experience life? Well, we need consciousness. We need to be aware, right? So there's consciousness. But there's a third piece, and Sydney Banks, who first described the three principles, said thought was the missing link, right? Because there are other spiritual traditions that talk about God and energy and talk about consciousness and awareness. But he said thought was the missing link, but he used it as a principle. And this is really what's key in terms of my coaching, because what he was saying was thought as a principle, that is the third principle that creates our reality. And
it seems the most tangible.
Right. It is the most tangible.
That's the one we can grasp, right?
Right.
Because we can hear it in our heads.
And so the way that a lot of three principles teachers, they're not, most of them are not coaches, but a lot of three principles teachers would talk, and psychologists started using this with their clients, and they got really, the thing with the three principles is a lot of people dismissed it, but people who started using it in the early days, it was all psychologists and therapists. The results they had with their clients were not just a little bit better, they were unbelievably better than other therapists. So like Dr. George Pransky worked with couples, and most relationship counselors and therapists have about a 20% success rate of couples staying together, right? Mm-hmm. Him and his wife, they had an 80% success rate of staying together. Like, it's just hugely different. And the 20% who didn't stay together, most of them ended their relationship amicably. Right? It was like really, really, really high. And then, they would go into businesses, and the results they were getting were just insane, just really, really good.
So how can we imagine the difference between it? For example, all the cognitive approaches, all the cognitive schools of thought, they work with thought in some way or another. What makes the three principles work so much more powerful, do you think?
For me, and again, I can only really be an expert on me, is that it's not about changing your thinking. The principles are a description. They're an understanding. They're not actually a coaching approach, right? Mm-hmm. They're a description of how we create our reality. Now, some people might not agree with that, but let's just go with me for a second. Mm-hmm. If that's true, there are implications of it. So with a lot of cognitive approaches, hypnosis, hypnotherapy, NLP, CBT, it's about being aware of the thoughts, and it's about changing the thinking. It basically, right? It's on the level of the content. What are you thinking about? With the principles, they don't really, it's not a cognitive approach. It's not about changing your thinking. It's about being aware that you are thinking, right? Which sounds almost too simple. And that's why I wrote my book, right? So I wrote a book about this because I realized people weren't getting the implications. And so my book has got all these chapters about different areas of life where there's implications. And I'll tell you one where I get a lot of feedback from positive feedback. There's a chapter I wrote on forgiveness. And one of my mentors, three principles mentors, really helped me with this. When I was telling him, I'm getting into the three principles, and I'm finding myself being a lot more forgiving of people, right? As I got a deeper understanding of how my reality was created, and it wasn't other people, right? But it was, my thinking that was creating my reality. So I started forgiving people, and he stopped me in my tracks. He said, "Why do you need to forgive people?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Well, why do you need to forgive people?" And he was like, "If the three principles are true, if they're really true, if your experience of life is mind, thought, and consciousness, and that's it, that's the complete formula, right? Then no one can harm you, right? So you don't need to forgive anyone." It's kind of like going way beyond what I'd read about from people like Wayne Dyer and all these other people talking about forgiveness and in spirituality and religion. And it was just like, it was such a mind-blowing moment. And I realized he was true, because the kind of thought process was, someone has harmed me, they've done me wrong, but I'm going to be big and magnanimous, and I'm going to forgive you. You bad person for wronging me, I'm going to forgive you.
Well, yeah, by your own standards, right?
Right. And yet what the principles are pointing to, if they're really true, the implications of that are there's nothing to forgive. There is nothing to forgive. And it really frees us. It really frees us from being victims anywhere in our lives, right? And so how does this work with coaching? Well, if you have that as a foundation point and that understanding of how life works, well, I've still got a coach. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to listen, all the stuff a coach would do, but it's kind of like I've already got the answers, right? And so what would happen is I would start coaching people and they would bring a problem or a challenge. But knowing what I know about the principles, I could ask questions, particular questions where I would help them see this for themselves.
Right. So essentially, there aren't any wrongs then. If I'm trying to wrap my head around this, I get that, why would you need to forgive anybody? But if I try to translate this to like a tangible coaching scenario, I don't know, somebody got fired because somebody else screwed up and that person was just more clever politically. And, you lost your job because of what that other person has done.
Right.
How, if I hear you speak, then it sounds like there isn't any right or wrong really. There just is, I get this sense from like meditation. When you sit with something, you kind of just acknowledge that things happen. They're not necessarily good or evil. They're not necessarily right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you can have preferences, but so let me look at this from a traditional coaching or kind of what I've been taught at coaching, right? And looking at some kind of coaching distinctions. There's so many ways you could coach someone around that, looking at owner versus victim, right? It's much more empowering to look at it through the lens of ownership than victimhood, of being wrong. You could look at it of how did you let that happen, right? Rather than blaming someone again through this ownership thing of why were you not smart political, and not again blaming, but empowering people.
Yeah.
And to me, this approach really aligns with that. Now, I'm not saying, anyone can do, in Sydney Banks, you say there's just, it's using common sense. If someone's harming you, it doesn't mean you have to let them harm you. You can move out of the way, right? You can, because you don't need to forget, your experience of life is coming from your own thinking. That doesn't preclude you from using common sense, right? So, it is spiritual at its core. And you can help people. Like I helped a CEO who was really struggling with the founders of the organization he was CEO of. And in his mind, he's like, well, they don't give me positive feedback, right? They don't, and I need it. I've done my psychometric testing and it shows that I need this, and they're not giving it to me. And his coach was helping him with like how to get that and giving him techniques and strategies and tips for getting that. And what I was able to kind of coach him around and question him and help him see things was, what if he didn't need that? Because this is the thing, I've got the answers. I know he doesn't need it. When he has a belief, and a belief is a thought you've held on to, that he needs positive affirmation from a boss to feel valued at work. And if he doesn't have that, he's going to feel demotivated and devalued. Then he's going to cling for techniques or strategies, or he's going to go somewhere else.
Right.
Whereas when we only had a few conversations, I helped him see that was just a belief. That's not fact. That's not a law of the universe that he needs that. It looks like it is to him, but he doesn't need it. And I don't necessarily tell him that. Well, there might be a little bit of that, but it's like helping him see that through coaching. It changed his whole world, just literally completely changed his world.
Right. So this is the change from the inside out. This is a spiritual mindset transformation of sorts, where you start to see yourself and the world differently. And from that, the behavior changes and the thoughts change. Is that, do I get
right?
Get that
and
right?
You know what? Some people, I don't even need to mention the three principles. Often I don't need to mention this understanding. It's just like my foundation piece, right? It's like, if you were a boxing coach, right, you might have had, I don't know, let's say you're an old school boxing coach and you've been around for decades. So you know all this information. And let's say you're training a boxer. You don't need to tell him all the things, but using all that knowledge and experience and your foundational understanding of boxing, You'll coach your boxer to do certain things. Hey, we're going to work on your right hook. We're going to, I don't know, right, we're going to have you do this particular thing. We're going to actually have you slim down for this fight, or we're going to have you bulk up, whatever makes sense. But he doesn't need to teach everything. And it's in the same way I see for coaching. It's like, for me, the 3 principles is my foundation piece. And the more I seem to understand that, just the more effective I become as a coach.
Right. So this is not a set of techniques or methodologies. This is a mindset that you have. This is an attitude that you bring in towards life and towards people in the way that you relate to life and people.
Yeah. It's more than a mindset and attitude. It's a truth. Right. And I know that can sound very arrogant almost, and I don't say to anyone, believe me, because it can sound a bit cult-like or whatever. And I didn't believe this stuff. I'm just like, go and explore it for yourself. And so, again, with my book, it was like, and everything I talk about, it's like, this is my experience and this is my truth. Right. Now it's based on
truth as in this is true for me rather than this is the universal truth.
Well, this is what I was going to say. I believe this is a universal truth, right? But I'm not going to impose that on anyone. I can only with confidence talk about this as my personal truth, small t.
So how do you work with people who reject it? Because then, it's a strange position to be in if, our clients don't see the world as it is true. They don't see the universal laws when that would help them so much. Wouldn't you be so tempted to want to show them the light, or teach them?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the skill of coaching. That's what we have to learn, right? Like, I'm not here as an evangelist. I'm not here to impose my beliefs or anything on anyone. And so, I would just ask questions. So for example, if someone was really mad at someone else in their life, right? Knowing what I know and what I've seen about forgiveness, I might ask them, do you need to forgive them? That might be a coaching question I could ask. Do you need to forgive this person? I'm not saying anything.
Sounds kind of leading.
Right? I'm okay with that. But it's not, right? Because they might, I don't know what they're going to say. They're going to say yes. Right. And I'm not in a position to forgive them. I just ask questions that I ask closed questions. I asked open questions. I asked what might be considered leading or not. I just go, and I'm always surprised because I don't know what the client's going to say. Yeah. And they will come up. Sometimes I'll just be asking an innocuous question and the client will have like, oh my God, I know what you're pointing to. And I'm like, what am I pointing to? I don't know. And they'll see something for themselves. Sometimes they'll see something even deeper than whatever I see. Right. So, and I just go there. So for me, if this is like a universal truth, right? If I ask enough questions and because they think differently, I'm going to end up poking holes in that. And which is what would happen to me, right? It's like when I would talk to someone like, yeah, okay, there's 3 principles, but, right? And there'd be an exception. But my manager, and I've written about this, my manager, he acts in this way and this really makes me feel angry. So while I was still learning this stuff in the early days, I was working a corporate job and I didn't get on with my manager. And, I was getting mentored by a 3 principles teacher. And to me, it just looked like the way he acted was cool. You can say what you want, but no, his actions caused me to feel bad. And my teacher just kept poking, right? And kept prodding and having me, well, do you always feel that way? Why do some days you feel different and some days it's not that bad? Right? Like if he poked enough holes in it, I'm like, well, God, maybe I don't have a leg to stand on. Right? And I started to that belief and reality I was looking at started to crumble to a point where I couldn't believe that anymore. I was like, no, it's not him. It can't be him. If it is him, then my reality would be different. And it looks like it's him, but that can't be it. And it did, and it shifted my whole relationship with him. And we didn't become best friends, but our work relationship just got a million times better because it was just getting worse because of what I was believing to be true, which wasn't true.
Right.
And so, and I do that with clients now. having said that, sometimes do I speak to people who don't get value out of what I'm saying or don't vibe with it or whatever? Sure, just like any coach. And if people don't get value out of it, well, why would I want to coach them? And I'm not, I say this to coaches all the time, if we're working one-on-one with people, we've got a really limited number of people we can speak to, right? Mm-hmm. And I see that like if I'm doing this for the next 30 years, I'm only going to talk to a few hundred people, max, like tops, out of 7 billion on the planet, so that's cool. I always say you don't need to push against a closed door. You don't need to shine your light where it's not wanted.
Yeah.
And people who resonate. Yeah. And it seems to be helping people. And I've always said, if I find something that would help people more, I'm going to that. I'm not attached to any particular approach. And I learn from so many different things even now, but it has been now for a very long time that the 3 principles has been my foundation piece, because I haven't found anything else that has helped me as much or helped my clients as much.
Yeah. And I think it's quite important that coaches get more clear on what sits at the foundation of their being a coach, and their work. My philosophical foundation is existential, and that really helped me to see my truth in terms of how I relate to the world and existence and other people. And I think that's a really important step for coaches as they mature, because it just makes us so much more solid in our foundations. And I think clients pick up on that. So I'd love to take that as a transition to talk a bit more about the business side, because I know you do a lot of mentoring. You offer your own apprenticeships. You worked with a lot of coaches. One thing you wrote on your website is that in 2012, you trained as a coach and then kind of immediately worked with people around the world and people in quite high positions, quite senior positions. So, you talked a lot about working with the clients that want to work with you and creating that connection, creating those conversations. So I know a lot of coaches are sitting out there, not just wondering about you specifically, but wondering in general, how do I work with my kind of client, and how do I place those messages out there? How do I create a situation or a scenario where people get me or they resonate with what I'm about and they would want to work with me? How do you get to that point? And how did you get to that point so quickly?
Yeah. Well, maybe I didn't mean it to, but that's not exactly what happened. That's not what I tried to get across on my website, perhaps. But, when I started out, I was just coaching anyone and everyone. And there were some people, senior people. I coached my boss. I coached my boss's boss. I just asked them.
What did you say?
So I had a real good reputation in my company. I'd been there for a long time. I was a good worker. And so when I decided to get into coaching, I told my boss I had a really good relationship with him. I didn't hide it from him. I said, hey, I'm doing this coaching thing. I'm thinking about a career change. And he was fine with it, And so I go and do the training, and I told my boss, his boss, I had a very good relationship with him as well. Not everyone does, but I did. And so when I come back, I'm like, hey, do you want to hear about what I learned about? And they knew how much money I'd paid, thousands of pounds. And so they were like, okay, let's have a conversation. And so my boss's boss, he was like, all right. And he was actually concerned. He thought I was really, spending money on the wrong thing. He actually tried to counsel me out of it. And when I came back and I was sharing stuff with him, he was like, oh, okay, no, it sounds like this is legit. This is.
Where did you train?
With Jamie, right? With Jamie Smart, all right? So I started sharing things with him, and he's like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And, articles I'd get and things that Jamie would reference, I'd share with him. And he and I would just talk anyway. So I coached him for 1 or 2 sessions. And then I asked my boss, can I coach you? And he said, yes. I coached him only for a couple of sessions. But I just kept asking. And then he said, well, do you want to coach the team? And I went, yeah. And then I did a training for them, and I actually moved jobs, but he was saying, look, 1 day a week, you can do this if you want. And that was a combination of, again, I was very valued as a member of staff. I was I'd been there for a long time, about 7 years. So that helped. But also they could start seeing the changes in me. So when I started learning about these 3 principles, I completely changed as an employee, like completely. I was a good employee, but I went to not just a really good, I went to like absolutely fantastic employee. I couldn't get through the work quick enough. I was just unbelievably good. And my boss even said to me, because I started learning about the principles in September, and you have your year-end review in like end of November. And he said, look, I'm going to give you this rating, which kind of reflects the year. But if you had done the whole year like you've done the last 2 months, not only would you be at a level above this, you'd be a level above that, which they kind of give to maybe one person in the entire company of 5,000 people. Like that's the level I started operating at. And so that carried a lot of, weight, when I said, hey, I'm learning something, and they're like, yeah, we can see something's changing in you.
Wow.
So that's how that kind of happened. But yeah, I was just asking anyone and everyone, like I wanted to just get as much experience as I could. And some of my early clients weren't, powerful people or rich people, or they were just students. Or
how'd you start that kind of conversation? How would you get into those kind of conversations?
You know what? I just was like, it was as simple as people who I knew. Hey, I'm training to be a coach. Would you like to hear this audio that I've got from my coach? I think it would be relevant for your situation. Let's say they shared something with me. Sure. Hey, I'm coaching. Would you like to? Do you want to have a coaching conversation? Because what you just shared with me, or what you post online, or whatever, like it might be helpful. And people were really open. In fact, the hardest thing for me was actually being willing to do that, because I was so afraid to tell people I was a coach because of them judging me. That's what held me back at the beginning. But as soon as that went out the window, even now I find it amazingly simple to get into coaching calls with people. I know coaches seem to struggle with it, but often it's as simple as just offering it. And even now, some people will not want to take it up. I don't care. It's not a big deal. But if you offer coaching calls, like offering to help, it's like if you saw one of your friends who was changing the tire of his car, you'd say, hey, do you want a hand with that? And then I'd say, no, I'm good, dude. I've got it. Or yeah. Do you mind just grabbing that wrench or whatever? Like, can you just hold this wheel? Or I don't know, whatever they would say. So I see it in the same way. Like, would you like some help? It's not that hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the step where a lot of coaches struggle is to make that transition from having a helpful conversation to asking for money in return. How do you create that transition?
I don't. That's the key thing, actually, and that's a really good question, because I don't. I used to do that transition, and it's awkward. I don't do that anymore, right? And that's one of the really great things Steve taught me. In fact, he challenged me many years ago. He said, I want you to basically stop making proposals for the next month. And I was like, what? And he's like, and I was like, oh, I'm just getting my groove on. I'm starting signing up clients. Like I have a system that seems to work for me. And he was like, no, just stop making proposals. And so I did it for a month, and I was two things. I was shit scared. One, secondly, it really helped. It forced me to up my game. So I remember talking to someone, and I'm like, I've got him to a point. I feel really confident. If I make a proposal, I could sign him up, but I wasn't allowed. I was doing this game that my coach gave me. So I was like, are we complete? Yeah, we're complete. Okay, bye. Put the phone down. Then he messages me, can we have another conversation? Sure. We have a second conversation. I'm not allowed to make a proposal. At the end of it, are we complete? Yeah, put the phone down. And so I was like, man, if I do this for the entire month, I'm not going to make any money. So it forced me to really be of service, because I had to get to the state where they were asking me. And even now, I would say 95%, maybe, I don't know, like it's a rare exception that I make a proposal to someone before they say, right, Ankush, what's it going to cost for us to work together? Right? Because I've served them enough so powerfully that they want more of it. And I'm happy to have 1, 2, sometimes, not always, but sometimes 3 conversations with someone, but also my coaching isn't one way, right? Like it's a 2-way thing. So this is the other part of it. I'm not just giving stuff away and hoping someone's going to say, hey, can we work together? Coaching is 50-50 relationship. It's, in my opinion, it's an active thing. So if I have a conversation with someone, I want to see how open are they? What are they giving? I'm going to probably give them homework, right? Right. Can we make an agreement? You're going to do this before we speak again, or will you do this? Can we agree on that? Mm-hmm. If they don't do it, well, I'm not going to give them another conversation, right? They're not ready. But if they are engaging with me, we're now coaching. And if my coaching is any good, if they're engaging and we're acting like we're already being paid clients, it's going to be really helpful for them.
Right.
And so at some point, they're going to just say, right, what does this cost? I want to do this.
Right. But they might have had 3 sessions and you didn't charge them. What if somebody gets used to it? What if
after 3 sessions, we're done? What I might say after the 3rd session is, like, at the end of every session, I'll just say, so are we complete, right? So at the end of the 3rd session, at most, right, which is more than enough time for someone to experience me. Often I don't even need 3 sessions. And sometimes if I speak to someone after 2 sessions, I just feel like we're done, right? Mm-hmm. And so whatever point I feel, I'll just say, so are we complete? And if they say yes, okay, you know where I am. It's been great talking to you. Goodbye. Phone down. Mm-hmm. I'm on to the next thing.
If they say, can we have another session after the 3rd one? What do you say?
Well, I would just say, these are my fees. You've had a good experience of me now. We've had 3 sessions. If you'd like to continue further, would you like to know what it costs to continue the coaching? Yeah. They'll either say yes or no. If they say no, bye. If they say yes, this is my range of. There's no weirdness for me. It's like, this is what it is. And people understand. They understand I do this full time. Yeah. I do this for a profession. People are smart. I would say I've not had it where people, in my experience, take the piss with that. In my experience. And that's also down to the way I am. I'm very professional how I show up. Like I said, the way they're engaging with me, you can't do it passively.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're getting to that 3rd conversation, they've been listening to stuff, they've been reading stuff, they've been, testing stuff out, like it's changing them. And so then they can make a real easy decision because they've experienced me, right? Yes or no. And it might be no for now. Like I had recently with the guys, like, I really want to do this, found out my fees. I just can't do that right now. I'm good. Like, it's cool. And so many times people come back. I've had people come back to me after 4 years. Hey, 4 years ago we spoke. It was a really impactful conversation. I wasn't in a position to hire you, but I've cleared off my debt. I've been promoted, and I've been thinking for 4 years, when I make some more money, I want to hire you. Okay, cool. Right, let's go. It happens all the time. There are people right now who I've spoken to in years gone by that I've completely forgotten about, who will at some point contact me and say, Ankush, are you available? Do you have space to take on another coaching client? Right. So there's no weirdness for me whatsoever. And I'm Yannick, I'm busy. I got to the stage last year where I just had to, like, I was over full. I actually took on too many clients, and I was really happy when clients weren't renewing. It's a different way of being, right?
Yeah, I get that.
And it's all good. And like Steve told me this as well, like, you get to a certain stage as a coach where, like, I know this, I don't need to create 15 new clients every year, right? Because I know most of mine are going to renew, right? Like a big portion are going to renew. And I want some of them not to renew, because then I like working with new people. So there's no neediness or anything from my side, because when I'm working with someone, it's like, I'm working with them, I'm being as helpful as I can. It's normally really helpful for them. Either they're going to continue or they're not. If they do, great. We get to do more great work and build our relationship and help them even more. And if they don't, great. They can go out and implement what we've done, and I've got a space for someone else. Yeah. And that always gets taken, And a lot of coaches think, well, it's easy for you, Ankush, because you're established, but they don't realize to get to this place, that's how you've got to be. Like, I speak to coaches. I remember speaking to one coach a few years ago, and she's like, oh, it's easy for you to go into service, and it's easy for you to be this way because your practice is full. And I went, no, this is why my practice is full. It's not the other way around. And that's what happened for me. When Steve said to me, stop making proposals, it wasn't because I was inundated with clients. I mean, I was doing okay, but he knew that was the next stage for me. He could see that. And doing that again and again, I learn. I don't offer coach. Like, sometimes people will reach out to me and say, can we talk? I don't say yes. There's nowhere on my website where you can have a conversation with me, book in a discovery call. No, don't have that. I had someone reach out to me recently. I actually have this all the time. People reach out to me and say, hey, I'm looking for a coach. Can we talk? I screen first. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, tell me what you want to talk about and why now? If I've spoken to them before, what's changed? What's new? And if they're not going to engage with me at that stage, right?
Mm-hmm. This is via email, or?
Yeah, even via email.
Or is there a questionnaire or a particular screening process you're using?
No, it's just all live. I don't have a set question or anything. I might just say, what would you love to, it might be as simple as tell me what's going on in your world and what would you love to get out of coaching? It might be as simple as that. Some people don't respond to that email, right? If they don't respond to that email, I'm not going to chase them.
Yeah.
Because if I did, and that's not arrogance, it's like, it's not best use of my time, because I'm going to be engaging with someone who's not really wanting the coaching. Like, they want a babysitter. They don't want me. And there's other coaches, and here's the other thing. I often speak to people, and if they say, look, we can't afford you, I'll be like, great. I know so many coaches. If it really is a budget issue, right? Here's 3 people you can go to. And I didn't do this on purpose, but what started happening a few years ago when I started doing this, and this wasn't the reason to do it. It wasn't a technique. I was genuinely trying to help people. Half the people would come back and say, we found the money. Whether we're like adamant, we don't have money, we can't hire you, no problem. Here, go and hire John. He's a great coach. He's not me, but in your budget, this person can really help you, and it will be a great investment. And I'm really I genuinely mean it.
Yeah. And people want to work with you. People want to work with the people that they talk to.
And it's not a technique, because sometimes they will go and hire John. Like, I've got coaches I've referred loads of clients to, and they go and work with that coach. And I'm really happy for that, because I'm happy for the client getting helped. Yeah, but a lot of the time, weirdly, and like I said, it surprised me, they'll come back and say, do you know what? I've got this pot of money, or, I spoke to my wife, or, something will happen, and they'll say, no, I want to work with you. Okay.
That's really good stuff. I want to honor your time. And we said we're going to switch to the kind of last set of questions that I always ask all of my guests, so have some kind of continuity about it. I'm sure we could talk about this a lot more, but I think there's a lot on the table now, and I'm sure people who are listening to this are going to really appreciate it. So thank you for sharing that with us. Round off. Well, quick fire questions, I say, but feel free to take as much or as little time as you want with these. Feel free to think about them. Feel free to say next. But they're just some interesting ones, and it's always interesting to see how different answers come out. So, firstly, you mentioned a couple of books already. You mentioned some people as well. But are there some other books or people that had a significant impact on your coaching, on your work?
Yeah, the one recently, so there's a few. So I'm currently reading the Way of Mastery, which I know Steve Hardison recommends, and I wasn't really intrigued by that book, but because he recommended it, I started reading it, and I'm really early on in it. It's by the Shanti Christo Foundation. It's a very spiritual book. It talks a lot about Christ, but if you can get past the religious part of it, that book is, every page is incredibly impactful, and I'm reading it slowly at the moment. So I'm amazed at how impactful it was. And I don't know if I've changed, because I listened to the audio lessons, about an hour of it a couple of years ago, and I didn't really get anything out of it. And then reading the book recently, I'm just like, wow, I could write a whole load of words for every page that I read in that book. Every page is not necessarily a book, but every page of that book is filled with wisdom. So that was incredibly powerful for me. Last year, I also read, what's it called? A Barbara Stanny book about money.
It was Overcoming Under-Earning,
which I'd heard about for years and never read it, never interested. And my coach bought it for me. I was like, oh my God, why did I not read this years ago? I've bought that so many copies. It's probably the most impactful book that I've read forever, like for a long, long, long time. That really hit me. But you've got to do it properly. You've got to do the exercises. It flagged up a lot for me. That was an incredibly powerful book. And I know your podcast is for coaches. So like, I mean, I don't know if you can see, but all these books here on this row here pretty much are like Steve Chandler books.
Oh, right. Wow.
So all these here are Steve. Some of those down there are Steve. I've got his new book, How to Get Clients, which is amazing.
For those who are listening, there must be around 30 books there.
Yeah, like so many. He repeats himself a lot in his books, but I have rarely come across a Steve Chandler book that I wouldn't recommend to someone. So many books yes, he's my coach. I get a lot of Steve, and still his books are fantastic. They are excellent. And I buy them for my coaching clients who are coaches all the time. I think they're so, so, so good. Both on the business of coaching, but also, being a powerful coach. So anything by Steve is fantastic. Amir Karkouti has got a great book called Lessons from My Coach, which talks about his experience with Rich Litvin, which is excellent. I don't read as much as other coaches.
I think there's plenty there. I think that will keep coaches busy for a few years.
Yeah, but I will say this: like, read. Like if you're a coach, I'm looking around. Like I really don't read that much. I see, like some coaches will read a book in 2 days. I take my time, but I go through books and I get so much out of books. Like so many times I'll be talking to a client and a book will pop up in my head that's so relevant to what they're going through. So yeah, read.
There was a question I forgot to ask, and I really wanted to ask it, which was, is there something, if anything, that you disagree on with Steve? Because what I noticed a bit of a trend of the people who have been working with Steve or who come through that kind of school, they basically they seem to have the same stuff going that Steve teaches. It's just kind of getting passed down, and maybe it's just that good, but I'm always looking for people to kind of disagree with the people who taught them and then develop in a somewhat different direction. So I wonder if there is anything, or if it's just something you took on because it just fits.
Well, you know what? I spoke to Carolyn Freya-Jones, who's an amazing coach.
She's awesome.
Who's worked with Steve for 14, 15 years or something. And I loved what she said. She said, there's a lot of Steve in me, and I'm not Steve. And maybe I've got that good fortune, kind of being in that circle, if you like, that, I know a lot of Steve clients, Gary Moller, Devin Banderson, Karen Davis, Carolyn Freya-Jones, Melissa Ford. There's a bunch of us who have worked with him for a long time. And yes, there's a lot of Steve in all of us because, he's been very, very impactful. But we're all different. Like of the people who've worked with him closely in his inner circle, I'm the only one I think who's like really 3P based, 3 principles based. I know one or two others have started looking that direction, have got some understanding of it. But yeah, Carolyn Freya-Jones relies a lot on Nancy Klein's work, and she comes at things from a different position. She did a lot of work with USM and University of Santa Monica. So, everyone's different, but if you work with someone for a long time, of course you're going to be impacted by him. But I remember in the early days, like I used to disagree with a lot of what he said, and I think sometimes that's part of, building, your coaching practice. I say this to my clients who are coaches, especially who are early on in their practice. I'm like, you don't know what's going to work. I don't know what's going to work, but together we'll try out stuff because you don't know. And Steve didn't know. So there's always that. But again, in conversations, sometimes I remember him saying something to me about a client of mine who had hired me, and then what she kept doing was hiring marketers. And so she said, I'm going to go to this thing. It's free. Don't worry. I'm not going to hire them. I'm just going to go. And what happened was she comes back and she goes, I did it again. I've signed up to this really expensive training for a year and da, 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 da. And Steve just said to me, look, don't tell the client that they're wrong. You don't want to do that. Just tell her that, you think she could also do your thing. And I listened to her and I wrote it down and I went, and afterwards I thought, no, I'm going to tell her that she's wrong. Mm-hmm. I had that rapport with her. I had that relationship. It felt right. And I told her, I said, look, one of the things we've been coaching about is you keep doing this and you've done it again. And she was going to lose like $1,000 to pull out of this thing. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm also not going to not say anything about it, that this is a pattern that we've been coaching around. And it was a delicate conversation. And, I told Steve about it and Steve went, you know what? I wouldn't normally tell people to do that because it's so tricky, but he goes, yeah, you've done an advanced thing, but it made sense for you in that moment. Right. And there've been other times like that where I had another client who was in this real sticky situation and Steve was like, look, you don't want to touch that. You want to stay out of it. And I kind of stayed out of it and I stayed out of it and I stayed out of it. And in the end, I just went, my wisdom, my gut just went, just say this to him and get involved. And I did, and it was exactly the right thing to do. So, I'm still doing me all the time. Mm-hmm. And, Steve is wonderful. I have learned so much from him. I keep learning so much from him. And I'm still me, I still have to do it my way, and my business is my business. My values are my values. Not that they're at odds with Steve, but I have preferences. I like doing things in a certain way. And I really like what Carolyn says. I think it's so true. There's a lot of Steve in me, and I'm not Steve. I'm definitely not Steve. And I'm very different in many ways.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a lot of coaches out there. A lot of coaches out there are amazing, doing amazing work, but there's also a lot of coaches out there who do quite dodgy work with very little training, going very far, doing work with vulnerable people that really puts them at risk. And it always begs the question, given that it's a completely unregulated profession, should it be more regulated? Or what do you think about regulation?
It's a hard one, right? It's a catch-22 because actually I used to think that, and there are moments when I think that. And part of what makes coaching so wonderful is that it is unregulated, right? Because, like Steve Hardison, right? Like if people have heard the story, he Deuce Latu, he was an NFL linebacker, comes to his office and in some ways he physically assaults him. You could say he grabs him. I mean, he asked for permission. Can I touch you? He said, yeah. And he grabs him and he throws him onto the chair. And there's a video on, you can Google it, TBOLIT NFL. I don't remember the warning in that video. Yeah. And the permission. No, he did. He says, can I touch you? And I think anyway. And the video is they're reacting what happens. And the guy in the video is a guy called Chris Doris, who's a buddy of mine. And Chris tells me it really hurt when he did it in the video. Right. And now if it was a regulated profession, stuff that he does would fall out of that. Right. Mm-hmm. Steve Chandler tells me a story, he smashed a window, he's baptized him in his swimming pool. JP Morgan, he got him in a headlock and was choking him out. But it's all from love. I love that. I love that this profession is so creative. And look, it is, there is some things that are a bit dodgy and I hear of stuff which makes me cringe sometimes about the lack of professionalism, but I don't know if regulation would actually change that. Would it actually solve it? I don't think so. It would just be called something different than coaching. Well, either that,
those people would still be operating.
Or either that, or if someone's vulnerable, like, would they know to go and complain? Like, I'm sure that I've heard stories of therapists saying stuff to their clients.
Oh my God, yeah.
Which is really unhelpful to them.
Yeah.
Really unhelpful. I've worked with a guy, and I'm not a therapist, who had some real particular issue, and this therapist said, this is the worst case of so-and-so that I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's the most severe. And then that stuck in the guy's head that, like, this is the worst thing. This is really bad. I'm never going to recover. And so it could be argued that's not helpful at all. But I'm sure that therapist has done good for his clients over the years. And would coaching being regulated help? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I think the best thing we can do, and I love this profession, is I really try and encourage coaches to be better coaches. I really want other coaches to succeed. And I think if the bar keeps getting raised by all coaches, right? Like the more Steve Chandlers and Carolyn Freya Joneses and Steve Hardisons and those kind of people, and Chris Dorris, and the more really great coaches there are in the world, as far as I'm concerned, right? And the bar gets raised, then the coaches that aren't that good, they'll just get weeded out, right? And so I'm really passionate about raising the bar for everyone, including myself. I think like they say, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Somebody asks you what the difference between coaching and therapy is, and you have a limited amount of time to explain it to them. Let's say, how would you describe the difference, or how would you draw the line, if there is one?
It's a real mass generalization, and maybe it's not 100% true, but my kind of broad brush explanation is therapy is really helping a client come to terms with something that's happened in the past. That's generally what therapy does. Something's happened and they go to therapy to try and deal with that situation. And coaching is about creating the future. So it may look at the past and say, well, that's happened, but it's like, okay, well, where do you want to go? What do you want to create? So it to me, it's that simple. And if you want a quick example, it's like if someone comes to a therapist around, some bad relationship they had, it's like, well, let's help you deal with all these bad relationships you've had. You go to a coach, it's like, well, you've had bad relationships. What do you want to create? Let's help you create a great relationship in the future. So I just look at it in that way, in a very simplistic, easy way.
Gotcha. Any notable trends you see in the coaching industry at the moment, or towards the future?
You know what? I don't really pay too much attention. People ask me all the time, do you know this coach? You know that coach? I really don't. I'm kind of, I just do my thing and I follow my path, and it just seems to work for me. And it's funny, like people sometimes come across me in the UK and they're like, we've never heard of you. And then they come across me and they're like, wow, you've got all this content, you're doing all this thing. And I kind of like that. I kind of just like doing my own thing. So I've been following my own path from day one and following my own gut and wisdom. And I don't know, I don't really stay too much in touch with what's going out there in the world. I hear that, coaches are really struggling to create clients and grow their businesses. That was the case when I started in 2012. It seems to be getting worse from what I hear, more coaches being qualified and they still don't know how to do it. But that's the only trend I can think of that I hear. Is it true? I don't know. That's what I hear. So, that's my best answer to that.
Fair play. What's your most memorable client? Like somebody who really stuck with you?
There's so many. I mean, the memorable ones are the ones that are a bit strange. In a weird way, the ones that are memorable is not maybe a good indication of what I do. So sometimes I'll tell these stories and I'm like, that's not what I do. That's just memorable because it's different. So like I had a client who came to me about leadership coaching, but I was coaching him in a group program. And I said, what are you most afraid to bring into the room? And he said, well, I'm reluctant to tell you that I have a very low sex drive, and my wife and I might split up because I don't satisfy her. I'm not that interested in sex. And then as soon as I asked the question, as soon as he answered, I was like, why did I ask that? I'm not a sex coach. I don't know what to do, but I coached him and it changed his whole life, and it changes sex life, and it permanently, I spoke to him years later, it's changed. So that was kind of cool. Another guy was stabbed by his ex-girlfriend 14 times, nearly killed him. And it led, and I didn't know this before he came again to a group program that I was doing. I didn't know this, and that's why he was really overweight. I didn't know he was using prostitutes. He was using drugs. If I'd known all this stuff, I probably would have referred him to a psychologist. And again, his whole life changed. He lost a ton of weight, again, through seeing how he was creating a certain reality. Got married, and the client who referred him was just like, that guy, wow, just completely changed. So I have like real cool, amazing things like that happen. And, there are always clients where they get really, really powerfully impacted. But I couldn't say there's one that, it's just sometimes it's cool stuff that happens.
Yeah. I'm always thinking about how to ask that question, because the most notable, well, how do you make that decision? Very notable, but I think I got exactly what I wanted to hear. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
When's the last time you had to stop working with a client? Whether that's just saying, I don't think we can continue, or referring them to somebody else?
Well, there's two different things. So stop working with a client, where I've said, I don't think we can continue. And that was like a long time, like probably like my second year of coaching, where that happened, where I refunded someone's money.
When was that?
Probably in 2014. Well, I was just working with this person. I was new. I hadn't even been coaching for 2 years, maybe less than a year and a half even. And I was probably a bit excited. I didn't do what I did earlier. I kind of made a proposal. I signed them up, and I signed them up too soon, and they didn't really get value. And so we had a few sessions left. I went, look, we can continue, but I don't think you're getting anything out of it. Would you like me to refund you for the sessions you haven't used? And he went, yeah. And I went, great. But I learned a lot from that, because then it really helped me slow down before signing someone up. Now the other thing is, when was the last time I referred someone to someone else? All the time. Like it's a regular occurrence, like
in the middle of the relationship.
No, normally at the start. So I'm talking about at the start, so if I'm talking to someone, hey, I'll refer. Sometimes I have people contact me. Hey, I'm looking for a coach. I'm struggling with my daughter, or my best friend struggling with their son. Oh yeah, I know 2 great coaches who work with teenagers and parents.
That makes perfect sense. I'm more interested in you already started working with somebody, and I noticed a hesitance from coaches to, once they're already in it, to then actually stop because it's not serving them, or there might be somebody else who's going to serve them much better.
That doesn't happen too much. Right? That doesn't happen too much with me, because I'm so careful about who I work with. Right. And so, look, sometimes I work with someone and I'm like, I think once we finish this set of coaching sessions, then we're complete. But rarely does it happen where like I'm in the middle of it and I'm like, I want to stop, and that means I've definitely rushed too quickly, and my gut's pretty good on these things. So if I'm not sure, I will take a bit longer. And it's the same with renewals, And typically what happens is, if I'm not feeling it, often they don't ask for a renewal. And so it's a non-issue, but if they did, I would just say, well, you know what, let's take a bit of time out, or we would talk about it. But it doesn't happen where, like, I had a client I coached and he was like, I fire clients all the time. And I was like, okay. And he goes, it works really well, because then they come back and say, no, I'll work. And then they increase their commitment. And I said, well, you can do that. That's one option. Or you can just make it really clear up front, your agreements, because if you're having to fire people, that means there's something wrong on the front end. And I always see this, that where things like that happen, it's like you don't have a strong enough agreement with your client. And I spend a long time, I spend like an hour, sometimes longer, with a new coaching client going through our coaching agreement on the very first call, because I don't want to have these issues down the road. It's a pain. And I'll say to them, look, even if they will have paid at that stage, I'll say, I'll refund you all your money, and it might be tens of thousands of pounds. I'm like, I'll refund it all. This is the agreement, and we can agree on it. And, if you want to change something, ask. But if we can't, and this doesn't work, I'll give you your money back. And I've learned again that lesson the hard way, because every time I had or someone was not on the same page, it was a problem later down the line, So it's yeah,
I say it often. It's in the contracting, contracting. When you have that agreement at the beginning, everything gets easier down the line.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Last question. If you could take over the screen of a person or a group of people, including the whole world, but could be also one people, whoever you like, and have their undivided attention for a minute, what would you tell them?
I've been dreading this question, because when you asked it me when we first booked this in, I couldn't think of an answer, and you asked it me again, and I was like,
it's the only one I share with my guests.
Yeah, and I I don't know. It'll be different every time, because I could say certain things. And like I could, one of the things I find with men, like I work a lot with men, non-coaches, I'm talking about my non-coaching clients. So my clients who are non-coaches. And I find they've got some version of I'm not enough. It's like every single one. And I'm like, would I say that? Because there's also this is the other thing I see, and maybe it's me, is that I've kind of moved away from thinking about what if I could get my message across, like through YouTube or marketing or, screens, because I really, and maybe it's just a preference, I just like working one-on-one or in a small group, because there's a difference, right? Like I would rather have a small group in person than take over the screen of everyone in the world, right? Because to me, it's like, do I have a shallow impact on loads of people, or do I have a really deep impact on a very small number of people? And I find that having a really deep impact on a very small number of people has much a bigger effect in the world, in my opinion. I think it has a more ripples, because, you can see people who do these motivational videos, and we watch them all, right? Maybe it's even a 20-minute motivational video. You're like, yeah, I'm going to change the world. And then the next day you're still doing the same thing. So I don't know if I could share anything if I took over the screen of everyone's and had their undivided attention that would actually change that. There's probably things I could say, but I would probably just like to have more, smaller group interaction where I could really look at someone and really tell them something that I know would really land for them.
Right. I'll take it as an answer of sorts. Thank you. Cool. Well, so before we close, Ankush, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they wanted to work with you? Anything you wanted to tell people who are listening, not in terms of, taking over their screens, but like anything you wanted to give to people before we close today? Well, I think you said everyone that tends to watch it are coaches. I've got a ton of content for free on my website. So the best place to go is Ankush Jain, ANKUSHJAIN.co.uk, not .com, .co.uk. And if you go there, there's so much content. I've got like 4 different YouTube channels. I've done 2 different podcasts in my life. I've got so much stuff there. So just go to the website and you'll get a ton of stuff for free, and it's good stuff. So do check it out. Awesome. Ankush, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your attitude towards coaching. I really appreciate having a dig into your philosophy and interesting the 3 principles. There's so much more, I feel, and it was great to sit with you. So lots of gratitude for you and the work that you do. Thank you. Thank you very much.